So this is me in Colorado a couple years ago. I had gone in what they call the mud season in Grand County, which is where it's supposed to be melting a lot, and so everything's muddy. So you can't rent snowmobiles, you can't ski really, you can't go out on the lake anymore. Grand Lake is this big lake that freezes over, and they run ski mobiles out there and all kinds of fun stuff, but you can't go ice fishing anymore. You can't do anything. It's all melting, and it's uncertain, and everything is muddy. And so you have to have a vehicle with four-wheel drive to get around even in the town. And so I went out there, and I went hiking, and I was with a buddy who also is not a big hiker, and we were hiking on a trail that we didn't know well. The East Inlet is a beautiful area in Grand County there this is the very beginning of the west side of Rocky Mountain National Park. And we were hiking and thought it was weird that we were the only hikers, but we kept going, and then a snowstorm blew in, and it covered the path back, and it wasn't a well-marked path to begin with, and so everything is just blanketed with snow, and we start to wonder, are we going to find our way back out of here? And so we didn't have a GPS with us. The phone did not have any service, so we had no way to call for help. So we were like, well, we got to figure this out. So at that point, there were several opportunities. We were several miles in at this point. You know, you can sit down and cry, right? That's not going to do any good. You can panic, and start need a bag to breathe in. That's not going to do any good. Or you can begin to chart a path home. And that's kind of what we did. We said, okay, well, I remember some of the things we've seen. We went by this tree. There was a pile of trees that we thought we recognized. And so we kind of charted. I don't think we went back the exact same way we came in, but we did end up back in the trailhead. So that was good. We found our way out. And peace and clarity instantly returned. And we said, maybe we're just done with hiking for this trip. And so life can feel like that sometimes. Life can feel like, you thought you knew where you were headed. You were full of optimism, and you headed out, and then you kind of got high-centered, or you got stuck, or you were like, oh, this is not where I thought I was going to be in life. And now I feel lost. And so you can start to fear. You can start to panic. Maybe you want to sit down and cry. You just don't know. But at the end of the day, charting a course home is the most valuable thing we can do. Because when we wander aimlessly, unsure of where we're going or how to get there, we tend to just waste a lot of time. Time on emotions and feelings that aren't helpful to us, that don't grow us, but actually can make us regress. And so finding our way forward, because we can't fix the past, the future is uncertain. What we have is this moment. And so charting and spending time charting those steps we take now can be a very valuable thing. Knowing how to get home, though, takes a path. And for your spiritual growth and your spiritual health, most of us don't think of a path, a clearly defined map or a way out. A lot of the time, we're just hoping that it happens. We're just hoping we grow spiritually. At the end of the year, we hope we're closer to God than we were at the beginning of the year. We hope we have some sort of knowledge that moves us forward in our purpose in life. And that's not likely to happen, just like everything else, right? It's not likely to happen that we're going to get healthier. It's not likely to happen that our finances are going to fix themselves magically. It's not likely to happen that weird noise you hear when you start your car up is just going to magically fix itself, right? We need paths for all of these things, plans for all of these things. And so, today, we're going to talk about is assessing where we're at, knowing where we're at, because it's difficult to chart a path forward if we don't even know where we're at in the beginning. So knowing where we're at and using that baseline to track our progress. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And whether you have been someone that, needs to put a budget together and you say, this is where I'm starting at, these are my assets, these are my expenses, these are my debts, so that I know where I'm at to start with. Or you're lifting weights and you say, I need to know what is my maximum amount of weight I can lift right now. What is my goal in the next few days to start raising that so that I can lift more and more incrementally. Where am I at? I need to know where I'm at. And that's what we're going to talk about, this valuable idea of judging or evaluating where you're at in order to know where you want to go. And that's difficult spiritually because we can start to say, well, is that something I can track? Is that something I can know? Is there a way to assess where I'm at spiritually? What counts? Is it I pray a certain number of times a day? Is it that I give a certain amount of money to the church? Is it that I read a certain number of pages in the Bible per day? Help enough little old ladies across the street? Like, what is it that I track in order to know where I'm at spiritually? How do I evaluate this? And so I want to present an idea today to you that comes out of a lot of research Harvard University has done and Barna Research kind of working together hand in hand. They've identified 7 different kind of categories, if you will, of human flourishing. Different things that we can look at in a more black and white way and then put them together to say, here's kind of a baseline, if you will, for our flourishing in life. So these 7 dimensions of human flourishing include our health, our character, our level of contentment, our finances, our relationships with others, our spiritual relationship to God, and a sense of purpose, knowing what we are doing and what we are about. What can come out of understanding these areas, the researchers say, is knowing whether this is a strength, like we're really trucking along on this one, like we're really making progress towards that goal, or a growth area, an area where we have not yet started to really make forward headway towards. To know that is just like me on the path. You've got to know where you're starting at, right? In order to know how to move forward. You've got to know what your baseline is. And so that's what we want to talk about today, is this idea of flourishing, not just survival, but thriving in our spiritual growth and health and development. And so what does it mean to flourish? In Psalm 92:12, it said, the righteous will flourish like a palm tree. They will grow like a cedar of Lebanon. Next week, when we start this series on the parables, we're going to dive in on the first Sunday into why Jesus uses so many agricultural examples and how powerful the metaphors are of the seed that Jesus teaches over and over and over. Farming metaphors, planting metaphors, harvest metaphors, why Jesus uses those. And here, in the Psalm even, in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible, we see this concept of very agricultural. And, most of us aren't planting what we eat anymore. Most of us are eating foods that someone else has planted for us. But there is still this concept that we understand when a plant is dying and when a plant is flourishing. We know that at a certain point. Some of you still have your Christmas trees up. And some of those trees don't look very good right now. And it's not confessional, don't raise your hand. But you need to get that out of the house, right? Because you've just got a firebox sitting right there. And I'm bad with plants. I'm going to talk about that next week, how I can kill a plant quicker than anybody. Like, I don't know if you saw the sad little plants I had up here for Christmas, but I was working every week to try to keep those poinsettias alive, and every week I killed at least one, every single week. And so we're going to talk about what it looks like to grow as we get into those parables. But to flourish is not just a little bit of growth, but it's vibrancy. That's what it really speaks to, vibrancy, really growing well. And so how can we then begin to grow? Well, we've got to start somewhere. We've got to begin. And so we have to know where we're starting at, knowing where the beginning point is. GPS has really changed a lot of that for us in the last few years as we've accessed these positioning satellites and can find ourselves almost anywhere now with software. But, when I was traveling in the beginning, we didn't have that. And so GPS was not widely available. It wasn't on your phone. A few people had those massive things mounted in their trucks or something with a big antenna on the outside to have a GPS in their vehicle. But most of us did not have access to that kind of technology. And so we had to know where we were starting and where we wanted to go. Proverbs says it in a really interesting way about when we start to make plans and about when we start to map things out. It says it like this. It says, we can make our plans, but the Lord determines our steps. Before you start on a journey, you need to know where you're starting from. And you may make a multitude of plans. You may have brilliant ideas, but there's a certain synergy that has to work together with the Lord actually determining, and this word is interesting here. I believe this is the New Living Translation, establishing, some of your translations will say here. This word is very interesting in the the Hebrew here for this. This word kun is the word for determining there or establishing. And it kind of goes to this idea of how God creates foundations, right? It's not about human building. This word specifically is linked to the idea of the creator, and it's used in various contexts in the Hebrew Bible for preparation, for bigger plans. And so it's like we make our plans, but many times they're limited in scope, and many times they're short-sighted. I want to win the lottery, right? Or I want to do better this year, or I want to, whatever that little goal is we make for ourselves. And so those are valuable sometimes, but we have to look at the broader scope of what God is doing to understand how he is really making those steps happen to execute those plans. And it's when, as I was reading one writer, he said, it's when our plans align with these directional steps that God gives us and foundational steps God gives us. That's when we see real progress, whether it's in our spiritual life or it's something that we're trying to execute in the world, we're trying to get done. It's that God has established the foundations, and then he also is the one that supplies the structures and the systems that make those things really happen. The contrast here is between when we make our plans without God's insight, and we get upset that they don't happen the way we want, and when we actually say, God, I want to submit my plans. So it's kind of like, if you go to the city and say, hey, I want to build this wild structure in my backyard, and they're like, well, you'll need to submit a plan to us first, and then you have to write it all up and say it, and then you send it to a planning commission, and they send it back either accepted or denied. And it's kind of how it is with this. Like, we come up with some great plans, but they're not always in God's will. In the New Testament, this character named Paul, who I tell you a lot, has written a lot of your New Testament, about 2/3 of the New Testament. His plan originally was not to be a disciple of Jesus and going around on missionary journeys and spreading the good news of Jesus. His plan originally was to persecute Christians, to murder Christians. That was his plan. That was not God's ideal for him. And so he had to radically shift that. If you look in the Old Testament, David in the Hebrew Bible has his own set of plans, and he kind of becomes like this to God and doesn't want to hear God's plans anymore and God's steps for him. And God shows him the error of those ways. Those stories are intended to help us evaluate our own plans and our own steps so that we will listen to what God has for us. I love to travel. I love adventure. I like coming home too, but I do like to travel. And it's gotten infinitely easier since I began. I remember in the old days, I've mentioned this before, but trying to figure out where you're going in a foreign area was very, very difficult. And I would print out tons of those Yahoo Maps or MapQuest, and try to figure out where I was going. I even had a road atlas. I can't remember who gave it to me. Somebody gave me an atlas. It's like a big book of maps, and you could look through it. And now today, I get upset if my Waze app doesn't know that there's construction ahead. I'm like, you should have known that. How far we've come with technology to so much. It's like holding your hand, it's like, okay, get ready, Clark. You're going to turn up here. Okay, it's time to turn. Oh, you missed it. Recalculating. It's ridiculous, the level of how it helps us, but it's wonderful too. Flip a U-turn, get ready for the U-turn. It's like talking to a toddler. It feels like that's how it's talking to me sometimes. It's like, okay, Waze is like, hey, there's a car up here. You might want to not, be so close to the edge. Okay, there's a cop up here. You might want to slow down. I love it. But if you think about it, so many times we didn't have technology like that, and it made it a lot more difficult. And so it's wise to use these tools in planning our steps. It's wise to know where we're starting, where we want to go, and then map out our route to do that. And ultimately, what I'm trying to say through that technology is it's much easier to have a guide than to do all this on your own, than to be a lone ranger. It's much easier to have a guide. So you really do need a guide. A map can show you terrain. A map can show you roads. But so many times it can't especially a printed map, tell you what's going on right now on that route. So you might know the best path. I got on a road one time, and it was a logging path in western Arkansas, and it seemed to me on the map like it looked like a good path to take my family down in our Kia Sedona van. It was not a good path to go down with my family in a Kia Sedona van. 2.5 hours into this drive, I have no clue where we're at. Phones aren't working. I can't find anything. We eventually pop out on a road with a little gas station, and I was like, knew exactly where I was going. And the look I got from my wife told me that that was not true. But a good map will show you. But ultimately, it's better to have someone that knows where you're headed, right? I mean, how much easier would it be to have a guide that knows where you're headed on that mountain pass, a guide that knows where you're going hiking, a guide that knows where the fish are and can take you to the right spot of the lake where the fish are actually spawning. A guide can help you. And that's what I want to talk about today, is this idea that God has provided that guide for us, and he wants to continually guide us. The Spirit lives and dwells in us to continually guide us in this way. I love what this author said. She wrote once, "Trusting God's plan is the only secret I know in the gentle art of not freaking out." I love that. Once you understand your starting point, and once you know where God is leading, it becomes something you don't have to have as much anxiety about. You don't have to freak out about it. John 10:10, Jesus says this really interesting thing. "I've come that they may have life and have it to the full," or your version may say, have abundant life. Jesus offers us this full, complete life that we can hardly even gather in our own mind. A life where we can really flourish. A life where we can not just survive day by day, but actually thrive and grow closer to him. And Jesus is this guide. Jesus is this perfect guide that wants to help us to figure that out, to decipher the right steps to take in the plans that we hope to have. Corrie ten Boom said it this way when she said, "Never be afraid to trust your unknown future to a known God." So, the keys to trusting God in the planning process here are, first of all, to know where you're starting, have your baseline, so that you can actually track when you make progress in this, and to chart your path using a good tool. And there's a lot of tools out there. There's a lot of ways to figure out, if you're thinking about how kids grow, the doctors are always like, okay, stand against this thing, and they set that little thing on your head to see how tall you're getting. No doctor has measured me in years. I don't know why they stopped measuring me, but no one cares how tall I am anymore. They still make me stand on the scale, and they want to weigh me all the time. I'm like, I don't think that's very fair. But it is what they do to us, right? They chart our progress, up or down or stasis. And so for ourselves, where are you spiritually? And how many times do we take a real evaluation of where we're at with God? And how often do we look back at that and say, over the last 6 months, over the last year, how have I grown closer to God? Or what areas of growth do I have that I need to kind of key in on? So what if there was a tool that could help us to map out our spiritual formation? And this is where we're going to end up today. And so I want to invite you to take out your phone. In just a moment, we're going to do this exercise together. And I've been kind of previewing this for a few weeks, that we're going to take an assessment today called the Church Pulse Assessment. Now, any good nurse or doctor will take your pulse, right? They'll see what your heartbeat is. First thing an EMT does, get your pulse. In all the movies, somehow they're able to instantly take a pulse. Taking a pulse is difficult for me. I went to EMT school, and I remember that was one of the most biggest challenges when I was working with patients, is like finding their pulse, and they're like, they got one? I'm like, I don't know. They're talking and breathing, but they don't have a pulse. I could never find it sometimes. So a pulse is not something like that. A pulse does take a second or two. But what is your spiritual pulse? And what is the pulse of our church in helping the rest of us grow spiritually? How do we think about that? So that's what this assessment will do. It's a tool that is designed to discover how you can grow. And we have to know where we begin. Just like a hiker needs a compass or needs a map or needs a GPS, we need tools to assess our current position and to chart a path closer to God, closer to spiritual thriving. The Church Pulse Assessment, like I said, takes research from Harvard, takes research from the Barna Group, puts it together, and has designed a tool that is not perfect, but it is better than we've had before. It is way beyond maybe spiritual giftings tests you've taken in the past. It's way beyond just hoping that you know a path forward or a future. I think it's better for what we're specifically looking for than even like personality assessments. Maybe you've taken DISC before, maybe you've done something of that nature. We've done biblical DISC here before. We've done a lot of different strategies, leader gifting tests, but I like this in that it's not a right or wrong. It's an assessment of where you're at so that you can chart forward. The cool thing is you'll get back a report for you individually. It'll have all your kind of assessment of what your strengths and growth areas are. And then I get back at the end of this, in about 2 weeks, I get back an overview report of our whole church and what areas we're strong in and what areas we could grow in. And what that'll help me do is then chart the next few years of topics that we talk about on Sundays, Bible studies we have, special talks we do, emphases, things of that nature. And so the church pulse assessment helps you out individually and helps us out as a body. And so I want to invite you to be a part of that today. So what we're going to do is ask you to take out your smartphone and take this quick assessment. We're going to spend about 8 minutes on this or so. So you may complete it. If you don't complete it by the time that we kind of wrap up, that's okay too, because you'll be using your mobile phone number to begin. That's kind of your login for this. And then you can go back home and log in and continue from where we started today. Some of you will complete it, but if you want to chew on the questions a little further, no problem. You'll be able to finish it up. I'll actually send the link out by email this next week a couple times to folks that weren't here. But if you would like to take it, it's very simple to do. And we're going to spend just a few minutes. Ben's going to play some music for us while we do this. The easiest way to get there, of course, is in the church app. If you're already in our church app, it's a link there today. It says Measure What Matters. You can scan the QR code on the screen behind me. It will take you directly there. Or you can go to our website at coffeecreek.church/pulse, P-U-L-S-E. All of those will take you there. I'll be standing in the back. If you have problems, you can't figure it out, just raise your hand. I'll come over and do my best to help you get logged into that. But take just the next few moments, and I'm going to pray over us, and then just do this church pulse assessment, if you would. So would you pray with me? God, we thank you for the time that we have today together to just spend a moment thinking about how you've given us a life that is full and abundant, and how we desire to be closer to you, desire to grow closer to you, and to trust you more. So I pray that we would assess where we're at today in this moment, and that you would help us to grow closer to you this next year. In Jesus' name.